Maximizing the color of your red varieties of apples at harvest is a must if you're trying to grow quality fruit and achieve the highest value when selling your apples. In this first video in this series about maximizing apple color, we're going to briefly discuss the history of the market and best ways to increase fruit color. Let's get started. It's no secret that many buyers of fruit seem to continue to demand more and more color for most of the red-colored commercial varieties grown today. Now, this seems to be the case, but the reality is that buyers have been requesting good quality, high-color fruit for centuries, while almost always paying a premium for that good fruit. Now let's briefly go down memory lane to have a quick look at the BC Fruit Grower Association archives from the late 1800s. As these excerpts from the BCFGA 128 years ago point out, poor quality fruit delivered to the market was, and still is, a disaster for the grower, the shipper, and ultimately the consumer. The 1897 was somewhat satisfactory prior to the previous year. Shipments by the Fruit Exchange increased from a total value of $5,000 in 1896 to $19,500 in 1897, with apples being the major product, followed by plums and pears. Returns to the grower were better than the previous year, running 1.5 cents a pound on average for early apples and close to 2.5 cents a pound for late apples. But quality continued to be a major problem. One load of fruit arrived in Winnipeg early in September, and the fruit was not in good condition when opened up. Consequently, they had to sell at very low prices, while some boxes were so badly off quality as to be practically unsaleable. Now, BC growers were learning for the first time the lesson that fruit must be grown, harvested, and handled properly, and presented attractively if it was to sell well. The numbers don't lie. Look at your own packouts for pricing and see for yourself. Almost always, red varieties with more red color pay substantially more. Whether you like it or not, this fact has stood the test of time for at least 100 years, and probably holds true for hundreds of years before that. Looking at this record from BC Fruit Packers in 1980, it's clear that fruit with more color paid substantially more than fruit with less color. And not surprisingly, recent pricing of high-colored fruit compared to lower-colored fruit still has a marked improvement in price. Now, better color almost always equals more money for red strains of apples. So as a grower, how can you try to satisfy that seemingly insatiable appetite for more red-colored fruit? The pièce de résistance of increasing the color or fruit is good old-fashioned summer pruning. While this option may not seem quite as appealing as some of the easier methods like white reflective tarps or sprays, it has the biggest impact by far. So let's take a deep dive into all things summer pruning. The most common question I hear is regarding the timing of when to prune. Now, the easy answer is probably 3 to 4 weeks before harvest, but it can vary depending on many factors. But before we dive into factors of when to prune, let's talk about what you are actually doing to the tree. You are cutting off branches with leaves on them, or solar panels as I call them. If you take off many branches with leaves, or even just remove the solar panels, or leaves themselves, you are decreasing the ability of the tree to get energy from the sun through photosynthesis. Now, this can be a scary thought. You may ask, will my trees still have enough energy to produce large-sized fruit if I summer prune? And can my trees still have a good crop load for the following year? Those are great questions, and my simple answer is yes and yes. Many healthy, commercially grown blocks are able to easily withstand summer pruning. In fact, some published research trials talk about other benefits besides more color on fruit at harvest, such as more fruit buds next year, and more consistent return bloom due to more light exposure on the existing branches and buds. Now, before we move forward on deciding if summer pruning is right for your orchard, I'm going to make a number of assumptions. I'm assuming that you're growing your commercial fruit in a way that already aligns with other widely acceptable horticultural practices, such as your trees had the correct preparation before planting, the variety was properly matched to a correct rootstock, and your trees are spaced the correct distance apart. You made the correct site selection. There is a proper nutrition program which is followed. You are correctly winter pruning the trees. There is a correct irrigation system and watering regimes. There is a decent rodent control program. The correct fruit thinning is done at the right time. And there is a precise insect control program being followed, etc., etc. Now, If you're not sure about some of these other proper horticultural techniques, a good start would be to check out some other YouTube videos such as apple pruning like a pro, apple thinning like a pro, or apple picking like a pro. If you're already doing these other important tasks, then more than likely your trees will be able to withstand a drastic haircut, aka summer pruning, and still be able to finish a large crop with good size, and now good color as well. If you are getting nervous that your trees may not be up for a big haircut in late summer, I would advise you to possibly hire a reputable horticultural consultant or get another qualified orchardist's opinion before making your next move. Now, another option if you're concerned about the health of your trees and what their response would be to summer pruning would be to summer prune only a sample of trees or a few rows of trees first at the correct time and simply observe the response of the trees by looking at the apple size and color difference at harvest compared to the trees that are not summer pruned. In most cases, I suspect that you will be pleasantly surprised by the results. Now that we have decided that summer pruning is right for our trees, let's look at some other considerations. All right, let's talk about timing. So earlier I said 3 to 4 weeks was the ideal timing before harvest to summer prune, and that is true, but there is often a difference between what is ideal and what is realistic. Why is 3 to 4 weeks before harvest ideal, you ask? Well, there are a few reasons. It is just enough time to expose the majority of the apples to direct sunlight while hopefully not being too hot to burn the fruit, all while still giving the tree the maximum amount of time with a high solar panel, or leaf, to fruit ratio so that you can also maximize your fruit size. As I've mentioned in my pruning videos, a summer pruning cut is generally a devigorating cut, while a winter pruning cut is most often an invigorating cut. For this reason, it is not a good idea to start summer pruning months in advance, since we still want large-sized fruit. Now, let's talk about some possible real-world examples of summer pruning and timing. If you have access to a large crew of workers that are able to summer prune your block in less than a week, that's great. If that's the case, then simply wait 4.5 to 4 weeks before the predicted harvest window and get it done. But a more realistic example would potentially be when you only have access to a small crew of labor to summer prune, while having a large amount of summer pruning to do. Now, if you get your crew to start summer pruning only 4 weeks before harvest, and it takes the crew approximately 4 weeks also to complete the pruning, as an example, you will end up pruning many of those trees so close to harvest, you will have missed the opportunity of them actually benefiting from much of the fruit being exposed to the sun for the time needed. In this case, the effect of increasing the red color will be muted substantially, even though the cost of pruning will end up being the same. This is where the reality of farming comes in. You will almost never be able to get the timing perfect, but it is still worth trying to get the timing as close as possible with the resources you have. In the second example I gave, where it would take the crew 4 weeks to prune the block, my suggestion would be to get your crew to start pruning earlier than the recommended 4 weeks, but only in certain conditions. So as long as the temperatures are not going to be too hot out, so either approximately 32 degrees Celsius, which is around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or under, or you have overhead sprinklers that you can use for cooling during the day. Now, if the temperatures are not cool enough, and or you don't have overhead cooling, you will have to take more precautions, such as maybe only pruning the east sides of your trees, assuming that your rows are planted in a north-south facing direction, of course. Now, if your rows run more in an east-west direction, then you can, of course, just prune the north sides of the trees without fear of the fruit burning. As you know, the sun sets in the west, and the afternoon is the hottest part of the day. Now, if you do not have overhead irrigation or misters to cool down the fruit, you may end up with cooked fruit on the west side of your trees. Cooked apples are great in a pie, but not on a tree. Now, if you're using your overhead irrigation during the daytime when it's hot and you've summer pruned your trees, remember that you need to keep continuously cycling your overhead irrigation each day when it's sunny and hot until the temperature cools down, or until harvest, otherwise the fruit will be much more susceptible to burning. Now, just like going on a tropical vacation in the winter, you can faithfully apply a high SPF sunscreen to your skin every day. But if you miss putting it on just one day, look out. you may end up looking like a red lobster. Now, burnt skin is never fun and doesn't sell well, especially when you're a piece of fruit. Now, how long you should have your overhead sprinklers on and how quickly they need to be cycled is a big conversation. But generally speaking, you will want to run each zone for roughly 10 minutes and be able to cycle back to that zone again in under 2 hours. As a side note, you'll almost always end up with the odd sunburned apple on the southwest sides of your trees, even when you've used overhead cooling and taken other precautions mentioned. This is normal in hot climates, since there will almost always be some pieces of fruit that get direct sunlight the entire afternoon, especially right at the ends of your tree rows. Don't sweat it. In most cases, you're potentially sacrificing less than 1% of your apple crop to increase 50% or more of your apple crop's color. Now, before I start getting into the meat and potatoes of the mechanics of summer pruning, you should have some basic knowledge of proper winter pruning. And it would also be very helpful to also know some of the terminology, such as the difference between a tipping cut, heading cut, and a stub cut, etc. Now, if you need to brush up on that knowledge, check out another YouTube video first, which is called Apple Pruning Like a Pro with myself, Steve Brown, so you're up to speed. I'm going to talk about 2 different ways to summer prune an apple block and the pros and cons to both. The first scenario would be hand pruning using experienced workers doing precision cuts. And the second scenario is hand pruning without experienced workers and just doing some simple heading cuts, or simply put, just cutting or hedging branches back. Now, both have benefits and drawbacks. In a perfect world, pruning with experienced pruners doing precision cuts is almost always the best option if you have the time and money. This is a better method for many reasons. Number 1, if many of the cuts are made in the right location in the summer, you will actually be reducing the time it will take to prune the tree in the winter. Number 2, correct cuts are often less sharp, as they will often be at a proper fork with another branch, which prevents punctures into the fruit. And number 3, correct pruning cuts take next year's tree shape, crop load, and fruit bud count into consideration, and therefore ensure that your crop can continue to be optimized, not just for this crop year, but every year after. Now, here's an example of how I might communicate to one of my more experienced workers to summer prune the block properly. I might say something like, please cut the branches back using the same cutting methods like winter pruning, of tipping, stubbing, and heading where possible. But keep in mind that due to the leaves and apples on the trees, an ideal cut may not always be an option. So in those cases, simply head the branch in question back while trying to, number 1, make sure that there are still branch options for next year, and number 2, you're being careful not to accidentally cut the fruit by getting too close with the pruners. The major disadvantage, of course, in doing precision cuts in the summertime is often the lack of time and labor to get the job done in the narrow time window. Pruning is difficult at the best of times to do skillfully in the winter, but when you add leaves to the picture, it can be quite difficult to make a decision where to cut the branch, which is often hidden behind the leaves. Now let's talk about hand pruning without experienced workers, and if you're in a time crunch. This method of simply cutting the branches back, or hedging, is sometimes all that an orchard manager can carry out due to the time and cost constraints. Generally speaking, you will be asking your workers to simply just cut back many of the branches close to where the fruit is hanging to expose the fruit to the sunlight. This seems like a pretty simple task, but it can pose some complex challenges later on when you're trying to properly prune the tree in the wintertime. Now, here are a few things to be aware of when just essentially hedging the trees. Number 1, sharp branch ends created by arbitrarily cutting back branches can sometimes pierce fruit in windstorms, or even when the fruit is being picked, so keep that in mind. Number 2, an overly ambitious summer pruner can unknowingly be cutting not only the branches, but also into the fruit, or even into the raised drip lines as well. So alert your workers to this common problem. Number 3, an inexperienced pruner can sometimes get overzealous and cut branches right back to the main trunk if they have no fruit on them, since they're not thinking about next year's crop. So it's also wise to alert them of that issue. Now, aggressive hedging can reduce the number of options you have to work with when you're winter pruning, and in turn reduce the amount of good fruiting wood and buds for the following year. So keep an eye on how aggressively your crew is pruning and give them clear feedback accordingly. Now, one seemingly easy way to save branch options for winter pruning later is to simply ask your summer pruning crew to not prune limbs back aggressively. But just remember that the trade-off is not as much color at harvest, so you'll have to balance both ideals. In my experience, I've found that there has never been a year in the past when I feel like I have ample time, labor, and money to throw at a perfect summer pruning job. So I end up doing a hybrid of the two main methods of both detailed pruning and also essentially hedging the trees. Now what I'll do is usually have 1 or 2 experienced pruners on my crew during the summer, and since they have the knowledge of how to prune correctly and not completely butcher the trees for future crop years, I will get them to summer prune in specific areas of my orchard where I know that trees are extra vigorous and need a radical but precise haircut. As for the many other parts of the orchard that have more of an average growth, I will then often get other less experienced workers to simply head back branches in a very basic way. As with all farm tasks, the hope is that over time, the less experienced workers will quickly learn skills and become more capable of making intelligent decisions. Make sure to keep track of your workers regardless of their experience to ensure that you're balancing speed and quality. Now, a quality pruning job is ideal, but it can be very expensive if you're dealing with unexperienced workers that are questioning every cut before making it. Keep the instructions as simple as possible and try to give your workers a realistic idea about how much time per row an efficient pruning job would take. Over time, as an orchard operator, you should become pretty familiar with your different blocks of trees and how long it should take to prune particular rows on average. Now, the best way to hone your craft for the future is to have proper records of the past. Now, I've talked about doing a detailed and accurate summer pruning job, a hedging job, and a hybrid of the two options, but there's one other option to consider when you're short on time. So if you're very short on time or resources, another option, or a third option, is basically just to go through your orchard and make big cuts, that's it, and move on very, very quickly. So in this case here, I'm just gonna cut the branches that are quite a bit longer to expose some bits of fruit, and then I'm gonna keep moving on. The thing to consider though is that if you are getting your crew to do this, you wanna make sure that they know what they're doing. Because if they cut off some big branches that have no apples like this, for example, it's not ideal. A lot of these branches that have no fruit on them, you might want for next year. So again, it's important that they have a little bit of knowledge if you're gonna let someone make some of the bigger cuts. So again, many of the apples are gonna be camouflaged behind the leaves, behind the branches. So my job is to come and expose that fruit to the sunlight. Now in these particular cases here, a lot of the fruit is actually very close to the end of the branches, which is fine. But again, I have to be cautious that I don't puncture the fruit with my pruner. So if I'm coming in to make this cut right here, be careful that I don't hit it with the edge of the pruners like I just did there. Because if you're hitting the pruners, or even just touching them a little bit, like even just hitting them that much, going into the branch, even if it bounces off, that fruit, it will now be damaged for harvest. Summer pruning tools will often be as basic as a set of hand pruners or loppers, and often simple as best. But of course, just like with winter pruning, there are tools that can possibly speed up the work and reduce fatigue, like electric or air pruners. Now also, extension poles on pruners can also sometimes help to reduce the ladder work and speed up the job. Often though, the best job is going to be done using a small pair of normal hand pruners to enable the workers to make precise cuts with one hand while using the other hand to hold or move leaves and branches so that the next pruning cut can be seen quickly. Picking platforms or bucket ladders, like chipmunks, are also much quicker than ladders in most cases. Now for a list of all the pruning tools and tips and tricks for pruning, refer to the Apple Pruning Like a Pro Part 4 video series by myself, Steve Brown. Now in the next video in this series about maximizing apple color, I will be talking about many other methods of color enhancement besides summer pruning by hand, including special tools designed for speed and labor reduction, special sprays, and other options. You won't want to miss it. Check out Maximizing Your Apples Color at Harvest Like a Pro, Video 2. I'm your host, Steve Brown, and until next time, happy farming.